So I love downtown Houston. I love going to coffee shops and restaurants. I'm actually here probably about once a week because the city just makes me feel alive. There's a lot going on. Kyle talked a little bit about this last week, but my question for you is, what is that moment or that place for you? Right? Maybe it's hanging out with friends, maybe it's driving down the road with the windows down, blaring your favorite song, or maybe it's simply just being out in nature, right? That fills you up, that makes you feel alive, because whether you know it or not, we long for these moments. We long to feel alive. So life is actually that word. It's a major theme or a thread that runs through the entire Bible. And the first place that we see it is in the book of Genesis. We see this theme kind of being introduced where Kyle talks about a garden, right? You see the scene where in the middle of the garden, more specifically, there's a tree called the tree of life. And for the people that the book of Genesis was intended for, they heard the word tree and it just made sense. Right? Trees symbolize life for them. They would have thought, yes, fruitfulness, life. More specifically, in the story where you see God creating, for them it would have clicked and they would have thought, yes, life is found in God's presence and in his power. So in Genesis chapter 1, we see God inviting humans to participate and be part of that life by eating of the tree. And this life that God invites humanity into was much more than just a surface level kind of being in an exciting environment. It was life that went down to the very core of who they were, right? We see glimpses of this, moments where we feel like, the world kind of stops. We feel satisfied. This is the life that God was calling them into, was a deep life. But then in this scene, you see a second tree. In fact, it's a forbidden tree. And God tells Adam and Eve, don't eat of that tree because it will bring brokenness and death. It was called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And basically, this tree symbolized humanity doing what was good in their own eyes. Or in other words, it symbolized Adam and Eve, or humanity, not trusting that life was found in God himself. So both of these trees, they looked beautiful, they looked appealing, but God gave them the choice to refuse of that forbidden tree and choose life in him. But why did God put both of these trees in the garden, you might be asking? That's a good question. Is God trying to test Adam and Eve? And the answer is yes, this is a sort of test. But why would God do that? Is God trying to be sneaky? Or is he trying to get Adam and Eve? That is a great question. So when we think about the word test, some of us get kind of anxious because we automatically think about school. We think science, math, physics, and to be honest, some of us might even get cynical when we approach a test day, because especially when it comes to those trick questions where we automatically think, hey, my teacher's out to get me. But listen, my life is actually full of teachers, right? My friends, my sister, my wife. What they would tell you is that these trick questions that kind of help you think outside of the box, what they're simply trying to do is they're trying to figure out, is this thing that you're looking at or this thing that you're studying, is it embedded into you, right? Do you understand the root of what you are studying? And in a sense, this is what God is doing in this test here, is he's trying to give Adam and Eve an opportunity to see, is this embedded into you? Do you understand that life is found in God and in God himself? It was an opportunity for Adam and Eve to choose ruling with God and finding life in him. But see, this is where we see this new character. We'll actually talk about this character a little bit more in depth next week. But this character, some sort of rebel that seems to hate God and seems to hate Adam and Eve. And he comes on the scene and he gives them another test. And in fact, he accuses God of robbing Adam and Eve of life. And he says, hey, you're actually better off not doing what God wants you to do. Eat of this tree instead. This is where you will find life. And this is ultimately what happens, is these first humans, they choose the second tree. They believe this lie that God was trying to rob life from them, and they choose a forbidden tree. And what it does is it fractures their relationship with God. It fractures the world. And we see this pattern not just throughout history, but specifically in the Bible, of not just people, but God's people choosing to believe this lie, right? That when they come to this test, they choose to believe this lie, that God was trying to rob them of life, and that life was actually found in this forbidden tree, which was a fake tree of life. And this is what we would define as sin. And it's not always as blatant as choosing those things that are obviously outside of God's heart for you, but it's sometimes choosing even good things that were meant to point to our life in God, and it's choosing to cast our entire life on those, but we find that they never deliver. It's really in this tension when we get to the story of Jesus and this theme of life, tests, and trees really climax with him. First, in the kind of life that Jesus lived, right? We see the way that God intended humans to live with him, where Jesus chose to trust that life was found in God the Father. But secondly, we see really the world as God intended. As you see Jesus healing the sick, he welcomes those who were considered outcasts. Jesus confronts brokenness. But really, I want to spend a couple of moments looking at a verse in John chapter 15 where Jesus uses an analogy to describe himself. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Does that language sound familiar to you? What Jesus is saying is he's coming on the scene. He's saying, I am the new tree of life. I bring God's power and his presence with me. And he offers humanity, again, another choice, another test to choose life in God, but they again choose death. Right? They not only choose death and brokenness, but they choose to kill this tree of life. And this was the sad and the violent result of humanity ultimately choosing to do what was right in their own eyes. So they kill this tree. The tree of life was dead, but at least it appeared that way. In fact, in John chapter 12, just a few chapters before this, Jesus says, he describes himself as a tree again, but he says, I'm a type of tree that will go down into the ground and will sprout back up as a plant or a tree that will produce much fruit. And this is exactly what Jesus is talking about here in chapter 15, where he not only says, I'm this tree of life, but I will welcome those to experience life in God again. But you will not only experience it, you are invited to become part of the tree where you will become like branches that spring forth life that will be used to share life with those who are dead. They're like seeds that help spread this life found in God again. And then we get to the very end, this final picture in the book of Revelation, very end of the Bible. And in chapters 20 to 22, you see this scene where God has made this new city, and all peoples from different languages are worshiping God in their own tongue. But in the middle of this new city, again, you see the tree of life, very similar to the garden. And this tree of life again symbolized God was with his people again, and they were invited to share in this life with him. So with this origin story and this theme in the Bible, what it tells is exactly what we already know, that we long for life. We long for it in such a way that we will spend the rest of our life looking for it. So listen, God offers you a choice to find life in him, and not just for you to experience it, to become, like Jesus says, like a branch that will help spread that life to others. So in other words, your life is sort of like this oasis in the desert for people who are looking for it. So what does this mean for you? First, that if you haven't found life in God through the work of Jesus, and you haven't believed God's heart for you, I'd call you to just do that, right? To embrace that truth. But secondly, if you are a follower of Jesus, simply abide in him. What he calls you to do in John chapter 15, stick close to Jesus. And this might seem cliche, but listen, God often has to call me back again to do that. I have to restructure certain things in my life so that I can be sure that I'm doing that I'm abiding in Jesus. So you were made for life, not just a surface level one, but a gut level, deep rooted life. So run to Jesus and find that in him.